High School had taught me to play. Now it was time to kill. Another entry revealed. The Fictional Diaries of Jeffrey Dahmer.
School as a Stage, Doing a Dahmer. Revere High School, Bath Township, Ohio. Fall 1977 to spring 1978. Chapter 1. Corridors of Observation. The hallways at Revere High School throbbed with a hidden pulse, a meat market rhythm of predator and prey that no one else seemed able to hear. My classmates stumbled through the corridors like blind cattle, shoving and bleeding, oblivious to the butcher waiting at the end of the chute. I alone moved with precision, not as a participant, but as an anatomist in a lab full of twitching specimens. There, laughter. There, whispers. Even the way their shoes squealed against the linoleum. Every detail was another data point in my growing catalog of human frailty. The morning rush between first and second period was my feeding ground. Jennifer Morrison lingered at her locker for exactly 37 seconds. 37 seconds in which her face betrayed a secret theater of collapsing defenses. The brittle smile, the flicker of panic in her eyes, the desperate hope that no one else saw the cracks forming. Billy Capshaw's trembling fingers stuttered over his combination lock, as if the metal dial itself mocked his caffeine-shaking weakness. Susan Walsh's hands rose compulsively to her throat, 11 times in a single 2-minute exchange, as if her body were silently rehearsing a strangulation that fate had scripted for her. I timed them. I logged them. Each quirk, each repetition, each unconscious tick was another weakness pinned and labeled in the invisible museum of my mind. Alcohol from the flask under my jacket thinned out the noise of conscience, leaving only the cold click of observation, the clarity of dissection. At first, the students were simply patterns, riddles to be solved. But soon, I saw the corridors for what they truly were, a hunting ground. Each adolescent face was a mask stretched tight over meat and fear. Some were soft enough to rip away with a single tug. Others might resist, but even resistance was just another form of data. The walls reeked of sweat and chalk dust, but underneath I could smell it. Weakness, ready to be cut open and studied. The realization should have sickened me. Instead, it thrilled. Something vital had cracked inside me, and through that fracture I saw the world differently. Not as classmates, not as human beings, but as prey.
Oh, where are my manners? My name is Grimwick. And that was just one page of tonight's diary.
Chapter 2. The Performance Laboratory. My so-called episodes were never accidents. They were crucibles. What began as a twitching parody had evolved into an experiment in domination. When my body convulsed and my eyes rolled back during Mrs. Patterson's droning lecture on The Great Gatsby, it wasn't theater. It was vivisection. Each gasp, each giggle, each flicker of unease in the classroom was a tendon being cut, a nerve being pressed, a psychological lever tested for tensile strength. 45 seconds. That was the limit. At 45 seconds, laughter began to warp, cracking into unease. Faces stiffened, breath quickened. Concern fought with amusement, and in that flicker of uncertainty, their masks slipped. Jennifer Morrison's smile twitched, revealing the reptile beneath. Cold, opportunistic, void of empathy. Tommy Kowalski's Boy Scout frown sagged into disgust. the same look you'd give a rotting carcass on the roadside. It was intoxicating, more than alcohol, more than sex could ever promise. To watch them betray themselves, to see the truth writ sudden and raw across their features. It was like peeling back flesh to reveal the bone beneath. Each episode was a dissection, and the classroom was my lab. I began prolonging the seizures, stretching them to the razor's edge, where fear eclipsed comedy. My classmates thought they were voyeurs at a freak show. They didn't realize I was the one watching them. Their pity, their cruelty, their shame, they offered it up freely, blind to the fact that I was memorizing every crack in their fragile facades. When I recovered, their relief wasn't for me. It was for themselves. They were glad their guilt had been suspended, their complicity erased. They didn't see that the real lesson of those moments was mine alone. People would rather laugh at suffering than face it, and they would watch far longer than they would ever dare admit. Chapter 3. Chemical Enhancement of Perception. The alcohol wasn't just anesthesia, it was revelation. Each swallow sluiced away the last clinging threads of conscience, leaving behind a clarity sharp as broken glass. 3 drinks across the day, spaced with the precision of a chemist, and the cafeteria dissolved into a living diagram. Patterns bloomed like blood under skin. Alliances, betrayals, rituals of humiliation. All of it unfolded with mathematical inevitability before my sharpened eyes. The popular table wasn't just a clique. It was a pack, gnashing and posturing, maintaining dominance through ritualized cruelty. Ashley Morrison was its alpha, her smiles serrated, her gossip honed into knives that bled rivals without leaving visible wounds. I saw her power for what it was. Brittle, desperate, sustained only through manipulation. Sometimes, when the alcohol hit perfectly, the fluorescent lights pulsed like arteries, and halos of color bled around people's bodies. Red for rage, yellow for fear, gray for despair. I knew they were hallucinations, but they were truer than reality. Jennifer Morrison's aura quivered with abandonment terror. Tommy Kowalski's simmered in bruised rage, his father's shadow gnawing his mind raw. Susan Walsh wore despair like a second skin, her throat-touching tick a ghostly rehearsal for suffocation. These weren't insights. They were weaknesses mapped, pressure points marked. The alcohol had stripped away the illusion of empathy and replaced it with something colder. Tactical awareness. Their pain wasn't my burden. It was ammunition. Empathy, I discovered, wasn't a reflex. It was a leash. And leashes can be cut. Chapter 4. Systematic Vulnerability Assessment. By winter, the catalog in my mind had metastasized into something more structured, something I privately called my collection protocols. Each classmate existed as an entry in a growing archive of exploitable flaws. Jennifer Morrison, terror of abandonment, desperate to preserve her plastic crown. Exploitation vector, threaten her status, peel her mask. Tommy Kowalski, a dog straining against his leash of masculinity. Exploitation vector, provoke until the leash snaps, expose him as beast. But Susan Walsh was different. She was already fractured, hairline cracks spiderwebbing her psyche, the kind who might slip away unnoticed, a shadow swallowed by the night. For her, the file read differently. Collection potential high. Like insects in biology class, her essence could be pinned, preserved, studied. Fear, distilled and frozen at its purest, could become an artifact. The word collected began haunting my thoughts. Not befriended, not studied. Collected. as though human beings were nothing more than pinned butterflies or organs floating in jars. The idea of capturing someone at the precise moment of truth, when terror stripped away pretense, wasn't fantasy, it was hypothesis. My enhanced perception episodes sharpened the protocols further. Billy Capshaw would fold quickly, a specimen for endurance testing. Jennifer Morrison's brittle vanity begged to be shattered in experiments of identity dissolution. Susan Walsh, yes, Susan, was a near-perfect candidate for preservation. These weren't idle daydreams, they were research proposals, and the only missing step was execution. Chapter 5: The Evolution of Control. Doing a Dahmer had outgrown the joke my classmates thought it was. Each staged convulsion, each gurgling collapse was no longer performance. It was domination. A single twitch and I could seize control of 30 hearts at once. Their laughter, their gasps, their nervous silence. I could summon it all like a conductor raising his baton. The power was narcotic. It coursed through me stronger than any drink. I was no clown. I was an engineer of fear, a puppeteer tugging strings of dread and amusement. My body writhed on the floor, but my mind thoughtful towered above them, dissecting who leaned in, who recoiled, who reveled in the spectacle. The ones who leaned forward fascinated me most. Jennifer Morrison's pupils dilated, her breath quickened, her lips parted ever so slightly. She wasn't concerned, she was thrilled. In her I saw the reflection of my own hunger, the thrill of watching another body tremble on the edge of destruction. I began to dream of escalation. What if I didn't stop? What if the twitching turned to foaming, the collapse into suffocation? How long before they crossed the invisible line between spectators and participants? Would they intervene? Or would they simply watch, faces frozen between horror and exhilaration, desperate to see how far I could go? The answer gnawed at me like a secret. They would watch far longer than they dared imagine. And in that knowledge, I owned them. Chapter 6: Institutional Blindness. The adults at Revere High were the perfect accomplices, though they never realized it. Their blindness was my camouflage. Their indifference, my cloak. As long as grades were passable and disruptions minimal, they saw only a quiet boy with a flask-hidden smile. They never looked closely enough to glimpse the predator pacing behind my eyes. Mrs. Patterson scribbled in her notes. Thoughtful. Jeffrey shows academic potential, but seems emotionally distant. Distant. Such a feeble word. She meant unnerving, but lacked the vocabulary. Mrs. Henderson, the guidance counselor, ticked her boxes with mechanical patience, mistaking my scripted replies for sincerity. Their ignorance was a gift. Under their noses I ran experiments, masked as awkwardness. I logged weaknesses, disguised as introversion. I rehearsed cruelty, mistaken for silence. The alcohol helped maintain the flatline facade, the placid mask of seriousness they confused with maturity. Sometimes I fantasized about telling them, about opening my mouth and spilling the contents of my mental archive, the protocols, the visions, the catalogued fears of their precious students. Watching their faces fracture in disbelief would have been exquisite, but I knew better. They would call it imagination, or they would panic, and panic meant interference. Better to stay invisible. Better to keep sharpening the knife. Chapter 7: Prophecy Disguised as Performance. By spring of 1978, I knew the truth. Doing a Dahmer wasn't parody. It was prophecy. Every convulsion, every grotesque contortion, every laugh that curdled into unease. They weren't jokes. They were rehearsals. Drafts of a script whose final act had yet to be staged. The nickname they chanted across the cafeteria wasn't ridicule. It was invocation. Do the Dahmer. They thought it mockery, but it was baptism. They named me, crowned me, forged the mask I would one day wear for real. What they called performance was simply a preview of the predator being born in silence. High school had taught me everything I required: how to mark the vulnerable, how to slip unseen through institutional cracks, how to turn laughter into control, suffering into entertainment, how to puppet human emotions with a twitch of muscle. And most of all, it had shown me that the line between daydream and deed, between monster and man, was nothing but willpower. Everyone harbors shadows. I had simply stopped pretending mine weren't there. The flask was empty, but the hunger it had awakened burned eternal. As I stood in the hallway for the last time, watching the herd bleat and stumble, I no longer saw classmates. I saw test subjects. I saw future trophies. I saw the stage lights dimming on rehearsal and rising on reality. High school had taught me to play. Now it was time to kill.
Ah. I trust you enjoyed this glimpse into a most curious diary. If so, leave behind a small token of your delight with a like, and do consider joining our circle by subscribing. And remember, ring the little bell, and you shall be the very first to know when another diary or a fresh entry emerges from the shadows. And if a whisper stirs in your mind, a thought, a riddle, perhaps a name of someone whose secrets you would dare to uncover, leave it for me below. I read them one by one. And who knows, your wish may guide my hand to the very next diary I choose from my collection.